From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, real therapists. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or advice you'd like to give, come on over to podtherapy.net and join the conversation. We hope everyone enjoyed their Father's Day and Jim's Father's Day Spectacular.
Yeah.
Nick is back in the studio. I know you all miss me. And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
I missed you, Nick.
You did not.
Every Father's Day, that's what I do. Is I sit there sipping my coffee in the dark, wondering, where's Nick? Hope he's doing okay.
I doubt that.
But thank you for the shout-out. If you missed it, there was a special little kind of bite-sized bonus episode where I read some excerpts from my book called Love, Dad. So go back and check it out if you feel nostalgic for Father's Day.
It was very good. Did you have a good Father's Day?
I did. It was a lot of fun. I got sushi, and now my kid, my son James, he'll eat sushi now. He's only 8, so it's pretty exciting. So I finally have somebody to sushi with. And it took 12 years to convince my wife to try California rolls. So now she's doing it too. So now my life is steadily getting better the more people I know that enjoy sushi. So yeah,
awesome.
Had sushi. So it's a big day for me.
Sushi for Father's Day.
Family
Great.
Sushi time. So, but the baby doesn't eat sushi yet because she's too little. I don't trust giving raw salmon to a 3-year-old. I just don't think that's a good choice.
I don't trust giving myself raw salmon.
Yeah.
Actually, we had that experience once where I almost started choking.
Oh no! That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
there.
I think I have a video of that. Yeah,
you do too.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
The chefs were running from out back. They're like, "Oh, is he okay?
Is he okay?" I was like, "No, let him die. This is how he wants to go. I've read his will. This is what he wanted."
It probably is, actually, if I think about it. I suppose that's a good way
Choking on
ending.
sushi?
Yeah.
I'll write that on your tombstone.
All right.
If
Cool.
I promise you this, I'll make a pact. If you die eating sushi, every year on the anniversary of your death, I will show up at your grave, and I will just like how people pour out a 40. Yeah. I'll sit there and just pour out some soy sauce. It's for you, buddy.
For the homies who ain't with us no
For the
more.
homies, that I've lost in the game. Sushi's not for bitches. But I did have a nice Father's Day. Thanks for asking.
Excellent. Yeah, I did too. I moved, but it has nothing to do with my father.
Yeah.
I did call. I was a good son. I called.
As you're removing your TV.
Yeah.
Hi, Dad. Happy Father's Day. I can't talk.
So, actually, ironically, we're talking about being parents,
Yes.
and we have some big news that hit recently, and we're going to try to stay relevant and current, and we've already failed, because since we even wrote this, stuff has changed, but I'm sure everybody knows.
This is why we usually stick to psychology and not current events.
Yes,
because in the Trump universe, it changes by the minute.
It does, and this is something, again, we've said this before in the podcast, that we're not political. We don't try to become political. But stuff keeps falling in our laps. And here's an example, why we want to talk about this. So obviously, I'm going to talk to the people who've been living in a cave. For the last
Tell them
couple
what's
weeks.
going on.
So since early May, 2,342 children, that number's probably already out of date, have been separated from their parents after crossing the southern U.S. border, according to the Department of Homeland Security, as part of new immigration strategy by the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So actually, early this morning already, they've
It sounds like Trump wants to
he's-
sign an executive order to make that not happen.
Right.
But there was a lot of politicking, right? Because at first he was like, no, I'm just enforcing
I have no control.
something.
There's nothing I can do about this.
The Congress wrote a law about this, and Congress, both sides, kind of came out and said, no, we didn't write that law. You're choosing to interpret a law a certain way. But what Nick and I are here to talk about is not so much the politicking of how things happen or what laws say, but let's talk about the psychology of these children, right? Because the children are being separated from their families.
And that's the thing that has bothered me watching this is I think, first of all, I have a lot of family members, friends that share or have opposite political beliefs as I do. Mm-hmm. And for everything, I understand why. I may not agree with it, but I understand where they're coming from. For the most part, they're usually coming from the right place. Mm-hmm. We just disagree on how things should happen. This, I do not understand the other end of this argument. It makes no sense to me, and I've not heard a logical reason why we would do this. And the big thing that upsets me is, and where you and I can contribute to this conversation, is the psychological effect that this has. Mm-hmm. On a developing brain, on children. There's damaging, irreversible psychological consequences to separating children from their parents.
Yeah.
And when this is done, it is intentionally inflicting trauma.
Yeah, that's not an accident.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even, you're a therapist, I'm a therapist, you're a father. I've worked as a therapist in foster care. I have been a foster parent. And so I have experience working with kids who have been separated from their parents.
Yeah.
And that decision is never made lightly.
Mm-hmm.
When DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, if they have to intervene and if they have to remove a child, that is a last resort.
Yeah.
They have to basically make the determination that staying with the parent is doing more damage than removing them from the parent.
But the child is the thing they're thinking about.
Absolutely.
When they're assessing damage. And that's, I think, what's unusual about this. And this is actually a good moment to help the person in the cave understand what we're talking about. Again, these families are crossing the border illegally. They do not have documentation. And they're bringing young children. And they're doing that probably because they would like to have those kids have a better life than what's available where they're from. But when they get here, when they get caught, the new policy currently is that they've been separating the children from their families. So here's a quote from the Associated Press, a story that came out from somebody who was there. The administration created what are called tender age camps for very young children. And this is what was written by somebody who observed it. The youngest child separated from parents at the border is 8 months old. The average age of children in the organization's care dropped from 14 to 7 years old in recent weeks after the new zero-tolerance policy was adopted. The youngest children are shell-shocked, crying themselves to sleep. Then they wake up from their naps, and again they're crying for their mom. Asking where their parents are, they absolutely need their parents right now. So it's a pretty serious thing.
Yeah, that is incredibly tragic, and even I think it's great. I mean, it's showing that he's a human, that he is now going to reverse this. Yeah. But here's the thing: that doesn't make it okay.
No.
The other defense that I keep hearing is the fact that it's like a summer camp. These kids, they go there and they've got video games and they've got classes and they do things and it's fun. No, it's not. I've been to summer camp. Yeah. I'm a scout. I've been to lots of camps. But when I went, my parents weren't afraid that they'd never see me again.
Right.
I was never afraid I'd never see my parents again. It's a much different situation. And it doesn't matter how comfortable you make that situation. The psychological damage that you are inflicting can't be undone.
Yeah.
That is the important message that needs to be sent. The other thing that really frustrated me about this was that I can understand if there's some level of ignorance. Like, we haven't had a whole lot of research to tell us what the effects are of separating kids from their parents. No one's making that argument because it's impossible to make that argument. We've known this since the 50s.
Yeah.
Studies have been done.
Well, it's the reason we no longer have orphanages in America.
Yeah.
Like if you watch old Batman and stuff, it's like, Batman, goes to the orphanage or whatever. There's orphanages in these old stories. They no longer exist because the separation of children from a family unit was discovered to be so devastatingly bad that it will follow them for the rest of their lives. And this argument, like it's summer camp, a 3-year-old, an 8-month-old, they're not going to a summer camp. Their only concept of safety, I was telling Nick this offline, it doesn't matter if you put these kids in the freaking Hilton. It doesn't matter. A child, there's perfectly well-adapted adults who were poor growing up. They lived in closets. If they had their family with them, then their concept of safety was being met. But I have a 3-year-old little girl. She has known me every day of her entire life. If I try to pull her away from her mother when she's on her mother's hip or attached to her mother's leg, she will lose it. And that's a very authentic and honest reaction. She genuinely likes me. She tells me so every day. But even I, her other parent, cannot separate her from her mother without her experiencing crisis. How much more so some guy in a freaking uniform who takes the baby away and doesn't give her back. Right. That is insane.
Yeah. It's absolutely insane. Washington Post did a really good article, What Separation from Parents Does to Children, done by William Wan of the Washington Post. And he interviews Charles Nelson, a pediatrics professor at Harvard. And for the average listener who may not know exactly what are the effects, he goes into a lot of detail here, and he kind of talks about some things that are really shocking. So as children grow older, they notice, following the children who have been separated from their parents, they notice there are differences in their brains. So those separated from their parents at young age have much less white matter, which is largely made up of fibers that transmit information throughout the brain, as well as much less gray matter, which contains the brain cells, cell bodies that produce information and solve problems. We're also aware that later on in life, the children who have been separated from their parents in their first 2 years of life scored significantly lower on IQ tests later on in life. Their fight or flight response system appear permanently broken. Their stressful situations that would usually prompt psychological responses in other people, such as increased heart rate, sweaty palms, would provoke no response in children. So this is a big deal. You are
permanent.
Yeah, there's no amount of therapy that fixes this. So when something like this happens, this is serious, and you're affecting someone who did not make the decision.
And they're the most vulnerable to deal with it. Trauma is inherently devastating. We have fully equipped adult men soldiers coming back from battles where they have seen something devastating but separated from their friends who they only recently met in their entire lives. And that, all by itself, is devastating and irreparable and causes years of harm. When you are an infant, when you are a toddler, when you are a child, this is the equivalent of murder. It's the equivalent of death. That's what this little brain has to interpret, and then they have to feel unsafe. And so, again, we're not being political about this, but it's very important that everybody understand childhood trauma is one of the most dangerous psychological conditions that can exist, and to inflict it knowingly on a vulnerable population is unconscionable.
Right. And one of the other big arguments that I just want to jump in because it scientifically makes no sense whatsoever, and I feel like as a therapist I want to weigh in on this threat or this idea that this somehow, if we just let people in, it's going to contribute to all this gang violence. There's so much fear of people joining MS-13, right? But I want to point something out very important here. By doing this, we're working against that. And the reason why is there's this really good book. It's called Reclaiming Youth at Risk. And one of the things that they look at is they look at this thing called the Native American Circle of Courage. Very similar to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where in the Native American Circle of Courage, it's kind of like a quadrant. There's 4 quadrants. And the idea is that we have to meet needs in these areas. So one of them is mastery. So we have to feel like we're good at something. Another one is independence. Another one is generosity, feeling like we can give back. And the fourth one is belonging. We all have a need to belong. And in the book, they talk about how this need is met normally within a family and what happens when it can't be met within the family. If that need goes unmet, then that child never develops a sense of empathy, never develops any kind of connection of emotions with other human beings. Or the other thing that happens is they will meet that need, but in an unhealthy way. So if they don't feel like they belong within their family, where can they belong? In a gang. Right? So by creating a circumstance in which we deprive them of meeting that need within their family, we are increasing the risk that later on this person, who now we already know the psychological effects, and they don't have any connection with human beings, where are they going to fulfill that need?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that phrase, hurting people hurt people. And so you're creating a generation of hurting people, and you're devastating them. And they don't have to wonder who did this. It wasn't some masked man in the night who stole their family away. It was an administration. It was a republic. It was that flag. It was the people with that emblem. And that creates a devastating problem where these humans are vulnerable for the rest of their lives to join unhealthy relationships, create unhealthy things like terrorism does. So it does the exact same thing. The Al-Qaedas of the world are created because we step on humans across seas, and then those guys rise up and do something negative. But again, we're not political in this show at all. But just know that childhood trauma is devastating. It is unhealthy. It has an echo and generational effect. And I really am grateful to see that the public is taking it so seriously. And as therapists who have worked with children and worked with adults who were children who have been devastated by this, just know that we take it extremely seriously and do not allow anybody to soften the image of this tragedy and make it seem like it's not a big deal. It is devastating, and we will not know the full recourse of what has happened for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the big thing that I wanted to accomplish today by bringing this up. I feel like we are in that unique position. We can come at this from the perspective of therapists who understand, the psychology and the effects of trauma. And I get the feeling that the people who do support this action don't understand the effects. I have to believe that because the only other alternative is that they don't care. And that bothers me.
Well, and if you're a listener out there, and again, we're not going to share too much of our political views, but if you're a listener and you say, well, no, we need to have some kind of enforcement, guys, absolutely, sure. I get it. Yeah. And if you're a constitutionalist, you probably don't believe in any punishment that goes into the category of cruel and unusual. So as therapists, it's important that we at least do our job and tell you, okay, here's the effect. Now, if you choose to still do that, okay, but now you're fully informed. And if that tempers your action, you say, wow, well, hold on, I don't want to hurt the kids here. How can we separate these two and get this correct? Okay, cool. Enter into that conversation. That's not our job to figure out. We're not politicians or lawmakers. We're just medical professionals. So our job is just to tell you, okay, here's the results of the action currently happening. Do with that what you will.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there's always going to be risks involved to anything. I in my head, I think about, if I have a terminal disease and I could possibly be dead in 6 months, and there's a treatment out there that could extend my life, but the downside of that is it may potentially completely destroy my kidneys and my liver. I'm willing to take that risk if it extends my life. However, I'm not going to take that medication if I have the flu.
Yeah.
Right? So going back again to like the whole thing with, when a social worker has to intervene to protect the child and has to remove them, that is at that point where they make the determination. That professional knows the potential damage that they are doing by removing the child, but they have determined that that is a risk they have to take. If they take no action whatsoever, the situation is going to be worse. That's a tough decision to do. Yeah. And in this case, I wouldn't say that's warranted. But again, I'll get off my soapbox. You got on your soapbox a few episodes ago.
I did.
You did.
Yeah.
It was my turn today.
You did it. No, but I think that we're handling it as best we can, guys. And again, it's above our pay grade to have an answer for immigration reform. It's not our place. But, if you're curious about how this stuff affects the kids, it's front page news. We want to make sure that you were fully informed.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to hear from somebody who caught her husband having an affair with his stepsister. That sounds more like us.
Yeah.
All right, you're listening to Pod Therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and it's time to read our listener mail. Okay. I found out my husband has been cheating on me with his stepsister. I'm so disgusted and shocked. Yikes. Me and my husband have been married for 3 years. We have no kids yet. Our first 2 years of marriage were great. We nearly never fought. But my husband confessed to me that he was a serial cheater in the past. At first, I was insecure, but with time I trusted him. But on the 3rd year of marriage, this is when we became distant. He has a stepsister who lives overseas, and she was coming to the States to visit. She comes to the United States frequently and stays at a hotel near our home. When she would come visit, my husband would go out with her. Sometimes he wouldn't come back until the early hours of the morning. Again, I didn't think anything of it. I figured they were just bonding as siblings. Little did I know they were having an affair the whole time. This is how I found out. I was supposed to go on a business trip for 5 days, but I ended up coming back home after 2 days. When I came back home earlier than expected, I heard the guest bed shaking upstairs. I immediately knew what was happening, but I did not expect to see him doing it with his sister. I walked in on them having sex, and they were surprised. I quickly walked away and walked out of the house because I didn't want to do something stupid. I went to my car and drove to my parents' house. My husband tried to call me multiple times, but I didn't answer. I broke down crying, and I didn't only feel betrayed, I was disgusted, because even though they didn't have the same blood, I still think of it as incest. The next day, I went back to the house to get my stuff with my brother accompanying me. It's been 2 weeks now. I started looking for divorce lawyers, but my husband has a prenup, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. How do you trust someone again in the future if you go through something like this? I don't think I'll ever get married again.
I don't blame you.
Damn. That is intense.
That is intense. Yeah. So, I mean, our listeners' question, how do you rebuild trust, or how do you have
Trust
another positive
again.
relationship again in the future? Yeah, that's going to be tough. And my advice, give yourself plenty of time. I mean, don't move too fast. It will happen. You can gain trust, but you're going to have to anticipate that there's going to be things that are going to happen in your next relationship that are going to be red flags to you that maybe wouldn't be a red flag to the average person.
Yeah. And, to speak to the specific unique dynamic here that this is his stepsister. So we now live in an America where there are lots and lots and lots of blended families, and we've seen this a lot. And I'm going to be honest, I have heard lots of stories and seen lots of patients and lots of families where this dynamic has existed. Now, this one's pretty big, but I have seen it where somebody comes in and says, I caught my 16-year-old boy checking out my 18-year-old daughter, their step-siblings, and I'm really concerned. Is he sick? Is he disgusting? Is he a pathological guy? And I usually back him down, and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
They are teenagers. They are not related by blood. There seems to be this biological braking system that occurs for people that are related by blood. In the same way that
Thankfully.
you gaze upon the face of your own child and you are genetically inclined to believe that they are the most beautiful damn thing that's ever existed. Because guess what? They look like you and you are biased. The same thing happens in reverse when it comes to sexuality. Parents are repulsed if they try to think of their child sexually, usually, unless something is pathologically broken in the human. And family systems are generally the same way. But whenever you have somebody that's not genetically aligned with you, it is not abhorrent or evil or pathological or broken for you to discover an attraction to them. We see this all the time. I've seen it with parents who confess that they have an attraction to their stepdaughter or son when they're in their 20s or something to that effect. Or siblings, I've seen it happen. A lot of stepsons have crushes on their stepmoms.
Or Donald and Ivanka.
Okay. There goes the not being political.
Sorry.
Yeah, but we've seen it a lot. So the first thing I want to say is, while this is horrific in the sense that an affair happened and shattered trust happened, and they abused the sibling trust and the family camaraderie in order to take advantage of the situation, the incest itself, I don't know that I would refer to this as incest proper. We'll call it step-incest, but not quite exactly what you think. Steps, I don't know. We'll leave that to the comedians. We'll let Matt and Paul tell us how to pronounce it. But so it's not necessarily incest, but definitely an affair has happened. And whenever we see things like this, Nick, we usually tell them to take care of themselves first, right, and to redraw those boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think she's on the right track. This is not something that it sounds like she wants to repair.
No.
I think, you're at that point. I think, with the divorce and the prenup, I realize that that's definitely a downside, but it sounds like even that's not going to be something that you wouldn't want to work this relationship out simply because the divorce is going to be messy.
Yeah.
This is a good thing. Just cut, run, separate, take care of yourself. Really, this is an opportunity for you to focus on yourself, to be you again, outside of a marriage, outside of a partnership, and enjoy that time.
Yeah.
Don't rush into another relationship. Take time to heal. And we've said this before in the past, however long you guys were together, married for 3 years, plan on the next 3 years to just be you and kind of find yourself again.
And it's a young marriage. Only 3 years in, there's not a lot of building that's occurred that can't be undone. Listen, we're not lawyers. We're not going to tell you what the consequences of divorce are in your life. If you wanted to reconcile, then we're going to stand beside you and assist in that project to try to bring the two parties back together again and find healing. I don't hear you saying you want to do that. I hear you saying, how am I ever going to trust again once I have been damaged by an affair? So there's a lot of folks that are listening to this who find themselves being hypersensitive, hypervigilant, hard to trust. They feel insecure. And maybe they constantly check on their mate, their spouse, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, checking their text messages, going through emails, following up on where they say they are. And they're not doing it because that person's untrustworthy. They're doing it because they've been burned in the past. Mm-hmm. And so, folks, if you're out there today and you've, survived something similar to this, I'm sure this one's pretty unique, but if you've survived an affair, you really do have to check yourself, because I do want you to heal, and you're not going to be a successful person in relationship if you're insecure, or if you're constantly checking, if you're constantly patrolling, if you're constantly looking for them to fail. You will inflict the exact damage on the relationship that you're looking to avoid, and it'll be really hard. So that's something you ought to go to therapy for, and you ought to begin to confront and unpack for yourself. Because if you're thinking that you can patrol your way into safety, you're going to realize the hard way that that's not possible.
Right.
Yeah. But hang in there, get help and go see a therapist, for goodness sake. That is a really weird story. And guess what? You're not crazy. He's definitely out of line. So get yourself some help, and we look forward to hearing back from you and tell us how it all turned out.
Thank you for writing in.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we hear from a man who wants to move in with his fiance before getting married. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and this next question is from a man whose fiance's parents won't allow them to move in together. Is moving in together before marriage wrong? I believe that people should live together before marriage. It's how I was raised. It's normal here in Canada. I've been dating a Filipino woman in her late 20s for 3 years, and I proposed to her earlier this year. She lives with her family, and they are traditional, so we've never been able to sleep at one another's house. She has always been home every night by a certain hour. I have spoken to her father and have asked him for permission for her to move in with me. He said it's not what they do in their culture, and he doesn't give us his blessing. Lately, my fiancé and I have been talking about it again, and I want her to move in. She spoke with her father again, and he told her that I must not love her because I told her that I didn't want to get married unless she moved in first. I very much love her, but I value my beliefs too, and it's not just her family's. I don't know what to do. I feel that I'm not going to get to live with her before marriage, and for me, that's a big step. There are other things I'm willing to sacrifice or participate in that I don't necessarily want. For example, I'm not a religious person, but they want a church wedding, and I'm willing to do that. In all honesty, marriage doesn't even matter to me, but because they're religious, that is not an option. Any advice would be welcome. Thank you.
So when I first read this, Nick, I thought several different things. First, I thought about the statistic about whether or not moving in together improves or decreases the chances of a long-lasting marriage, which I'll let you guess at because I know that data.
Okay.
But I'm going to withhold it for a second.
Okay.
The other thing that I was thinking of is how you and I are constantly trained as therapists to respect the culture of the person. So if somebody comes into us and says, my religious faith tells me that I shouldn't swear, and my boyfriend wishes I would, and I'm uncomfortable, we're usually going to defer to the culture and say, hey, let's all respect this person's culture. I'm not going to tell you should or shouldn't do anything. I'm going to respect your culture. But in this case, we kind of have two cultures. He kind of makes that clear. She has a Filipino culture, which is more conservative in this case. He has a Canadian culture, which is more progressive, which implies this would be a good thing to do, and he's bothered by not doing it. So what a fascinating problem to have. Yeah,
and the thing that I noticed about this is I'm not hearing what her take on any of this is. This, our writer seems to talk about his beliefs and her family's beliefs, but I'm kind of wondering, where is she at with all this? Because ultimately, I think a big chunk of this kind of falls back on her.
Right.
I think, to our listener, I think this is your wedding. This is about you and her. And I think that decision should be made between you and her.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't want to intentionally upset, our future bride's family. But this is your decision. I think you guys need to work that out.
Yeah, be bold enough to make it together. But, I also understand Filipino culture. I've worked with quite a few people in therapy that come from the culture. Family is so important. Blessing is so important. And so for this female, for her, I can read into this a little bit and see that if you guys did make a bold decision that completely disenfranchised the wishes of the family and the culture, I want you to appreciate that you're asking her to do something that is really big for her. It might not be. She might not care at all. But I suspect that she does, or you wouldn't even be having this problem. And you need to appreciate that in that culture, you're asking her to do something permanent. That even if you guys get married and it all works out, the family will feel that it was inconsistent with their values, inconsistent with their traditions, inconsistent with their faith, that there was a defiance of the patriarch of the family, which leaves a lasting mark. And it sets your marriage up to be kind of toxic in a sense because it could lead to her resenting you. Later in life, she may feel like you pressured her into this and that you caused her to have to disenfranchise from something she really aligns with, especially culture. Like your nationality and your heritage, that thousands of years that comes with you, that's your identity. And for you to just shun it and walk away from it because you now live somewhere else where that's not celebrated can be, I think, traumatic for that person. And so I would caution you that you are going to have to just work this out because I don't think you can just, bail and jump ship and say, whatever, we're just going to do what we want, unless she's okay with that. But you run the risk of her feeling resentful later on.
Right. However, he's got culture too.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's really tough to give advice on this because
I almost feel like he's using that word strategically. Like he's like, in my culture, which is very important to me, it's like, listen, there is no Canadian cultural book that I had to read in therapy which said, and by the way, it's very deeply important to the Canadians and a long-held tradition that you always shack up before. No, that's not a thing. It's contemporary culture, which is fine, and I'm not disqualifying it, Nick. Nick's already putting up the hand sign of like, how can you do that? He's doing the shruggy shoulders thing.
Come on.
I mean, I'm saying if you did a cost-benefit analysis on both of them, which side stands to have the most harm? I think the answer would be her. She has an entire tribe that doesn't approve of this, and he is one person who would prefer this.
I would agree. And then I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, is this the thing that you're willing to dig your heels into? Mm-hmm. Is this the thing that is so important to you that you're willing to risk the relationship? Because I agree with Jim in the sense that if you guys decide, nope, screw it, we're going to do it our way, there's probably going to be some kind of long-term ramifications to that. It could just be just between her and her family, but it's quite likely that could trickle over into your relationship. How important is it to you that you live together before marriage? Mm. And if it is that important, then fine, then stick to that and go for it.
But I would throw out one more caveat to this, Nick, because I would ask him, if he were sitting right here, let's give him a name. I'd call him Bill.
Okay, Bill.
He seems like a Bill, Canadian Bill. If I said, hey, Bill, listen, if you guys do move in together, Daddy says go for it. You guys go, she comes over to your house this weekend. You guys move all in, and you're living together, okay? So you do this trial run. You're taking it seriously. It's not pretend. You guys have been together for a while. She's your fiance. So it doesn't work out. After living together for a couple of years, things start to fall apart. You realize it's not going to work out. What are you going to do? The answer is probably, well, we would separate. We would break up. She would go back to her life. I would go back to mine. Because he says at the end of this question, marriage doesn't even matter to me. It's not even a thing to me. Right. So if that's actually true, then what do you care if you have to marry her first for her to come live with you? Because if it didn't work out, you're going to take the same exact course of action. You're going to divorce her, right? So it doesn't matter to you, right? You said marriage doesn't matter to you. So if that's true, if it's culturally not important to you, if you barely even recognize the piece of paper, then what do you care? Go ahead and do it because it's important to them. You get what you want. You can live together. If it doesn't work out, you have the exact same real life experience that you would have had if she just said yes and moved in right now.
Good point.
Checkmate, Canada. Take that. Okay, so now
Jim does not speak for everybody.
I do not speak for all of America, caveat. Also, the data that I mentioned earlier. So yes. the question of does it improve a marriage's chances of working out if people move in together, or does it decrease them? And the answer is, it is one of the highest factors that tells me that it might end in divorce. Your likelihood of ending in divorce goes up abruptly if you premaritally cohabitate, if you move in together before marriage.
Okay, first, you didn't give me a chance to answer that before you gave me the answer.
You want to take a guess?
You said you were going to.
Well, I didn't want to leave you. What if you guess wrong, Nick? I don't want to. hurt your credibility to the Canadians.
You're saying that you didn't allow me that because you didn't want me to look bad.
To protect you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Jim.
But it's an interesting piece of data, right?
Doesn't surprise me.
Oh, okay.
No, doesn't. That's what I would have guessed.
That is what you would have guessed.
And the reason why
let the
is
record show
because
he would have guessed that.
Who is most likely to wait until marriage to move in together? Most likely it's the religious.
Okay.
What would you say is the most likely reason that people don't get divorced?
Is some kind of dogma?
Yeah, has to do with religion. So they're more likely to follow that guideline, and they're more likely to work things out in case of marital conflict because it's a sin or the church doesn't agree with it if we get divorced.
See, this is why I interrupted you, to preserve your credibility. Because actually, Nick, I'm going to actually you. The data shows that the religious are just as likely to get divorced. That is not a protection. There's just as many divorced people in the pews as there are at the Penn and Teller congregation thing. So it actually doesn't protect you. What we see in the data is it is more likely to increase your chances of divorce because you simulate a version of the relationship in which you are not married, and then you transition to a version of the relationship in which you are, but nothing has changed. The only thing that changes is the jewelry you wear in your left hand and a piece of paper and maybe your bank accounts. So it's hard for you to have this abrupt, I have changed my ways, this is now an official thing, and it's easy to stay in that mentality of this can end and I'm okay with that because you were mentally prepared for that before the marriage because you were just dating. You have an escape plan. Whenever you transition and all that's added is a piece of paper, there's not this newness. There's not this chapter difference. And so what we see is people kind of just ease their way into this, and it doesn't have that starkness. If it doesn't have a stark beginning, the stark end of it doesn't scare you. And a lot of people avoid divorce, in part what you're talking about is true, because there's a stigma to it, because it's scary to do this. But if it wasn't scary to begin it, if you eased your way into it and one Wednesday you're not married and Friday you are, then it's not scary to undo it, where Friday you are married and Monday you're not. Because it wasn't stark in the beginning, it isn't stark at the end. And so we just notice that that's a factor that can increase the risk of divorce because they just don't have that sense of like, oh my gosh, this is a big deal. Like we also have data that shows that if you have a wedding, and this is actually an interesting bell curve, that if you don't have a wedding at all, the likelihood of divorce is increased because it wasn't stark, it wasn't in front of other people. You don't feel the sense of like shame if you get a divorce because nobody saw you do it. If you have too big of a wedding and you spend too much money, also increases your risk of divorce. And the data seems to track that it's because it sets you up to fail. You have financial insecurity at the beginning of the marriage, and there's a resentment of like, oh, we did this for your stupid dress.
No, that does. That
the bell curve says that the increase of marriage holding together tends to be when you have a modest wedding. So interesting little data. We should do a whole show on this, Nick. I have like a whole sheet of like factors that increase and decrease the likelihood of divorce.
We should do like a Jim and Nick's wedding show.
Ah.
But then, what'll happen is then when we post it online, because you only get so many characters, it will just say Jim and Nick's wedding.
Yeah.
Which actually will probably get a lot of hits.
Yeah, we'll actually get more hits for that.
Yeah.
So right. Interesting data anyway. So good luck to you, Canadian Bill, and lean in on that relationship. Be sensitive to the culture, brother. And, ultimately I'm rooting for your relationship. You two are going to have to make a decision together. And if that means departing from her culture, just make sure that you're not pushing her into it. Make sure you're including her in that conversation and sensitive to her needs. You're not just fighting her family, Bubba. You're also fighting her. And I want you to be careful with that. That could set you up to fail.
Right. Okay. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to read a listener mail about society and fitting in. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and the next question is from a man who doesn't fit male stereotypes. Society says I'm not man enough. How can I be me? Hi, Nick and Jim.
Hi.
I'm a 30-year-old man with many feminine traits and interests. I'm extremely introverted and a highly sensitive person. I've always felt a lot of shame about these parts of myself and have tried to fake being more extroverted and masculine than I really am. This was exhausting and made me miserable. Lately, I've been working with a therapist to help me discover who I really am and what my values are. I now know that there's nothing wrong with me, and I love these qualities about myself. I'm living more in line with my values and allowing myself to explore my interests without self-judgment or shame most of the time. This has increased my self-confidence and decreased my depression. The problem I'm having is that while I know it's okay to be the way I am aware and constantly being reminded that it's not what society values, and there is still a male hierarchy where I'm pretty low, so my confidence is frequently shaken, and some of that shame comes back, and I have to redo the work I've done to build myself up. Do you guys have any advice on how I can make that self-confidence more permanent and make me more immune to society's ideas of what I should be like? Any advice on how to get by in a world that says there's something wrong with you and is always trying to fix you? Thanks.
All right. Well, first, good for you for being in therapy and addressing this. And my thought behind this, reading this, this whole idea of fitting in, and the way I think our society is kind of set up is like you have to create an identity, but that identity has to fit into the categories that society places. And sometimes it's really difficult to do because we don't all fit like that. Right. But one thing that I think is very important to remember is that I think there's a lot more people out there like you than there are people that completely fit in. I think there's a lot of people who do what you did, where you kind of give the appearance that you're fitting in, but you still don't feel comfortable. I think there's a lot of people out there that do that. Yeah. By you just being out and open about that and being able to say and to just be you and just be who you are, I think is very inspiring. I think a lot of people can take that and grow from that. We're not, our world doesn't need more people that fit into these already existing categories. We need more people like you who are just you, and you may fit into this category in some ways and this category other ways, and you can kind of bounce around.
Our president of our fan club, Dawn, who's a therapist too, she always says, you got to be you, everybody else is taken. Right. And I like that line a lot. But I think it also goes back to that circle of trust, the Native American circle of trust that you talked about in an earlier segment, how people need a sense of belonging. And I kind of hear the writers saying, that's kind of what's lacking. And so I think identify that, right? And go find your tribe. Like find people that share your values, that accept you for who you are. I think that's important for each of us to have. But I really want to validate what the writer's talking about, because some listeners are probably hearing this and going, what's he talking about? There is an invisible masculine thingy that's like this weird grid tangible structure that permeates at least American society, where we talk about it as like the wolf pack, right? Like there's alpha wolf and there's all these different things. And humans do this too, and part of it's a remnant of our tribalism, part of it's just masculinity doing what it does. And so for this individual to say, listen, I went through the self-acceptance, but in society I get picked last for the kickball team, and I kind of get put off in a corner as, what is he? Is he this? Is he that? Not sure. And, not really picking him to lead the team or whatever. And I think that it's really powerful that you bring this up, because this is part of the conversion that I'm grateful to see society doing as feminism influences us as well. That we're letting go of some of these patriarchal structures that are sort of artificial and just enforced, and we're starting to look to people to lead or be valuable based on merit, based on their contribution, that they are qualified because they are, not because when I look at their LinkedIn profile, that's the picture, And I think that that's important, Nick, because I resonate with what this person's saying. I've met lots of folks in life that whenever, and you and I, we've worked with lots of professionals in our corporate structure. We've interviewed lots of people. And sometimes you'll look at somebody and we are human, even though we're therapists, we're likely to jump to a conclusion about them and think, oh, this person's that kind of archetype of humanity, right? They fit in that category. But then we interview them and we realize, whoa, they were nothing like what we thought. And so my encouragement to you is lean in on relationships, break stereotypes, break assumptions by humanizing yourself and letting people meet you for who you really are, because that's how you reveal your value. And you know what? I think 7 out of 10 times humans are going to respond to who you are, even if they had an idea of who they thought you are before that.
Yes. One thing you said, Jim, that stuck out to me. You said something about leadership. And I'm looking at my phone right now because I just came across, this TED Talk that I came across the other day. It's called The Hidden Power of Not Always Fitting In by Marilyn. Hold on.
Wow, that's really opportune. The Hidden Power of Not Always Fitting In. It's a TED
Marilyn
Talk.
Cantwell.
Is that findable on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay.
So go on YouTube, The Hidden Power of Not Always Fitting In. Just type that in and it'll pop up. One thing that she said in there is funny because I just came across this the other day, but one thing she was talking about in there is she makes this point about leadership and how when we think of entrepreneurs, people who have really done something amazing for society, they don't fit into one category. What they kind of have they create their own, she calls it an island. They create their own island. They find something that they feel like they fit very close to, but then they build their own island just off of that so that they still have influence from all these other areas. And people like you, our writer, who say that you feel like you don't fit in, you have this great leadership quality and this ability to innovate because innovation doesn't happen when somebody stays in their silo. Like they stay within their own industry. Innovation happens when you pull from another industry and pull it into your industry. She gave the example of like the camera. Like, okay, so the camera evolved. We're able to create a smaller camera, with a lens, a smaller lens and all that. Okay, that's great. But it wasn't until somebody said, hey, let's put that in a phone.
Right.
That now it became such a huge deal.
Huge. Right?
So to our listener, one thing I would encourage you to do is really kind of look at this as being a positive thing, right? I mean, let's exploit this for what this can evolve into. This can be really good. So yeah, the fact that you don't feel like you completely fit into these categories, embrace that.
Embrace that. And, and he said, what do you do with a world that's always trying to fix you? I say find your tribe, and I say find role models too. I know that's really important for folks, especially for teenagers that we've worked with that might identify as homosexual or transgender. It's very important for them to find a role model, an adult out there who's showcasing how they live authentically and in congruence with who they really are, unashamed, and how there is a place in culture for you to exist. So I think it's important for this writer to find that tribe and learn to identify with them a little bit and surround yourself with your people. What Nick said earlier about that fourth square of belonging as part of our human need, I think that's really true.
Yeah, thank you for writing in. Right back, give us an update.
Yeah,
let us know how things go.
Let us know how things go.
Also, housekeeping note. I apologize. I didn't get your name because I just copied it from the email and put it into our script.
Right.
So if you're writing in and you want us to say your name, sign off at the bottom. Just say whatever from whoever, and then if you do that, then we'll know to put it in there. Otherwise, if you don't, then we'll leave it anonymous.
We do not say it. Yeah. So if your email is bob@bobverse.com, we're not going to say this is from Bob, right? Because you didn't give us permission to say that. So, but if in your letter you say thanks Bob or thanks Sleepless in Seattle or whatever you want to call yourself, then we'll read it that way. So if we don't have a name, we don't use a name. But speaking of that, actually, Nick, we had one more thing that was dropped in through the website, through the anonymous box. And this one actually is really similar to something else we've already answered. But I thought we have a few minutes. Let me go ahead and read it, and then we can kind of at least tell that listener where they can find the answer.
Absolutely.
So the question was, how can I find a good therapist? Which, if you're a regular listener, we've addressed. What methods can you suggest for finding a good therapist? I've delayed seeking therapy because just the thought of the trial and error method makes me feel exhausted and defeated. I want to waste as little time and money as possible finding a therapist whose credentials I trust and with whom I have some chemistry, like speed dating, but with therapists, preferably via Skype or something. I distrust the phone-in referral services I've seen because their matchmaking methods aren't transparent.
That's a valid concern. Yeah. It can be exhausting. When I did some therapy, I went into therapy a few years back and I lucked out. Like I found somebody, I read their bio. It seemed to be what I was interested in. It seemed to match what I was looking for. And went to that therapy session and it was perfect. And we just hit it off. It went really well. But I know a lot of people who don't have that experience. Right. The trial and error method can be very frustrating, as well as just what your limitations are with finances. I mean, if it's going to be out of pocket or if it's going to be looking at billing insurance, you may not have a whole lot of options. Check out episode 22 of our podcast, about 17 minutes, 20 seconds in. We answer this question. We give you some feedback, some ideas that you could possibly use. Anything else that you think we can add to
I get
that?
most of my referrals from bathroom stalls, and so people usually write...
I did not think to check the bathroom stalls.
Yeah, that's where I get them. So
it's
people
where
will
a
write,
listener.
for a healing experience, call Jim.
Jim, what do you think is the best truck stop to go to get...
to find a good therapist.
I've found that the Flying J truck stops usually have the best referrals.
Is that the one? Yeah, you get in that stall and you're like, you know what? I do want a healing experience. It's time I dealt with my childhood. Yeah, no, but check out episode 22. We go in depth and we actually point you into some websites and give you some advice of even how to interview a therapist before you actually meet them. So check out episode 22, minute 17, about 20 seconds into that minute. And that's your homework, writer, so that you can discover the answer.
And I don't have my own private practice. Jim does, but so maybe you can answer this. People will call you and can talk to you before scheduling an appointment, or do they not?
I've had people that request that. So usually I'll get an email or a voicemail or a text that says, hey, I found you on this bathroom stall at this truck stop, and I wanted to see if I could tell you my story briefly and get a feel for you. And usually I'll give them a call back. Sometimes I'll just have to text them or email them or call them and say, hey, I'm not taking any new patients right now. And they'll usually refer them based on what they've told me, like, hey, it's an alcohol problem. And I'll say, oh, you should call this person or whatever. So, but yeah, it's a very organic process. Therapists almost always have a office phone number that they're using. You can leave a message. They usually don't answer on the first ring because we're in session, so it would be disrespectful to the other person, but leave a message and they'll usually call you back. And I recommend leaving about 3, find about 3 people that you like and just try them out. But listen to the writer, and we said this in episode 22, doing nothing is way worse than doing something. I would rather you give it a try, because I have never met a therapist who is so ridiculously unqualified that they do harm. I mean, that's extremely rare.
Right.
So I'd rather you go. If for no other reason, you do some work, you get the ball rolling. If it's not a good fit, you ask them for a referral, and they'll send you to somebody they think is a good fit now that they've gotten to know you.
Yep. Just by starting, you've gotten closer towards the solution.
It's easier to, steer a moving ship than a parked one. So just get moving, and you'll be surprised at the progress you start making. Even if you have to change direction 180 degrees, at least you're moving. Good
advice.
All right, that's all the time that we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy or on Twitter at PodTherapyGuys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Senor Trump.
Thanks, and we'll see you for appointments next week.